Right, so welcome everyone. We are really excited to have Dean Gitlin join us today on the series that we are doing on sharing your academic journeys, your scholarly journeys. So, all of you know Dean Gitlin, but perhaps you also don't know what an amazing researcher and scholar she is, along with our leader, being the leader of our college. So, some background. She's an applied research sociologist who is nationally and internationally recognized for her research on developing, evaluating, and implementing novel home and community based interventions that improve quality of life for persons with dementia and their family caregivers, as well as enhancing daily function of older adults with disability and addressing mental health disparities. She has received continuous research funding from federal and private foundations for over 35 years. So, goals, remember. In all of her research, she applies a social ecological perspective and person and family directed approaches to examine, intervene, and support individuals. Her efforts involve collaborating with community organizations, health and human service professionals, and other stakeholders to maximize the relevance and impact of such interventions. For example, the Tailored Activity Program is now being used in 9 countries, including Latin America, Scotland, England, Australia, Hong Kong, and parts of the United States. The COPE program and its iterations are being used in various parts of the US and Australia. Also, several of her measures have been validated in Spanish and are being used in various countries. Dr. Gitlin is the recipient of numerous awards and is the author of close to 300, 300, oh my God, 300 scientific publications, including co-authoring 7 books, the most recent published in 2016 on behavioral intervention research. She's an appointee to the Health and Human Services Advisory Council for the National Alzheimer's Project Act and is its current chair. She recently co-chaired the first national effort to develop and implement the National Research Summit on Care and Services for Persons Living with Dementia and their caregivers. She's also a recent appointee to the Medical Advisory Board of the Alzheimer's Association and member of the International Lancet Commission on Dementia Care. I could go on and on and on. I won't. So, the point of this is really to learn from your journey, and we have the article that you shared with us, but we'd love to kind of just hear how you go about kind of planning your research, decisions you've made, and any advice you have for this group of emerging scholars on when how they plan their future. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you and welcome.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, that sounded like a different person than me. So, so as I'm going to share my screen, I did prepare slides, but honestly, we can make this very interactive. But you know what? I just realized, Dr. Kaimal, that I have to update the what you read a little bit because I just want to make 2 corrections. I'm no longer the chair of the advisory council because you can only serve a 4-year term. So, and I'm no longer on the medical council for the Alzheimer's Association. So I was, but then they termed me out and so forth. So I'll update that. So thank you.
Yes,
thank
please.
you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I planned some slides in as, I was thinking, first of all, I really think it is interesting to hear everybody's career. And I will tell you, it's always kind of surprising when you reach a certain point in your career that you're asked to talk about your career. So just a reflection, it's always humbling and like, why would you be interested? So I appreciate that. And any lessons I've learned, I'm more than happy to pass on and we can have a discussion. But I am going to be speaking really about my scholarship career and the decision to be a dean is one that people ask me a lot about, and I'd be happy to talk about that as well. But I was just really thinking about this in terms of the research career. And, it's hard building a program of impactful research and getting the funding. But, I love science. And I always fall back on the impact. The biggest impact is through science. And So I don't know, I just thought I'd ask Siri, like, how do you build a productive and impactful program of research? Like, hey, Siri. And when you do that, I know this is really strange, but I got my own book that came up on grant writing. And I said, well, that's not going to help me. So I better reflect on this process and think about this and see what I come up with. And I think what's really important about hearing about from different people is that you're going to see there's different pathways. And I think I would just really want to emphasize that it's important to understand there isn't one career path that leads to impact or effectiveness. I just think that's very important to understand. And I can explain what I mean by that later, but there's lots of factors that you have to consider as you're building a career. And those factors may look different for different people in terms of family obligations, where one lives, opportunities, et cetera, and privileges. And so I always feel strongly that there's many ways to many. I actually have people who call me up really upset that they were told they have to do a postdoc and then another postdoc. And do you have to do a postdoc? Well, it's really helpful in today's funding world. But if you don't do a postdoc, that doesn't mean you're not going to be successful. So I really go by this quote, which was not designed to address career pathways, but I do think the statement, which really works. Organizations, so you could say, researchers seeking the best way to many, because we do science to have impact. That's why we do science, should ask which is the best method. It's much better to consider which path will work best for you for a given circumstance than to follow a trajectory. I have residents who come to me and say, how do you, medical residents, how do I was told I can't have a family or a baby until I finish this year or next year or whatever. And, I can't, in the academic world, you'll hear, and I just heard it the other day, someone called me up crying that another university, that their professor told them, their chair told them that, now that they're in academia, they can't get pregnant until it's, their 9-month contract, like in the summer, they have to deliver and things like that. And I just want you to know, I don't believe in any of that. And there are many ways to many. And I think we're very harmful to our scientific community and our young faculty when we say there's only pathways. And I will share that I do get calls also from the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, who are just like many of the Ivies, Hopkins, and which is not an Ivy, but thinks it is, and others, where there's only one pathway. And so I know I'm saying this over and over again, but when you dig deep and you say, what do you want to accomplish? What kind of impact? And in what way do you want to have impact? And what's going to work best for your situation and the circumstances you find yourself in? To me, that's the best advice that I can give you. The other quote that shapes how I think about my own career is a quote from my mentor, who's M. Powell Lawton. And in my office, and we haven't been in our offices, but in my office, his picture is hanging. And when folks come in my office, they often ask, is that my father? And I said, well, actually, he's my intellectual father. He is my mentor. And M. Powell Lawton, who sadly most people don't know, was an incredibly brilliant man who really established the field of environmental gerontology and developed many of the tools that are used in agencies and research in gerontology, like the whole concept of activities of daily living. He really operationalized and thought through and measured. So he said, my intellectual biography that discerns a grand and organized plan should be immediately revised. It is full of caprice and coincidence. And that's certainly how I understand my pathway. Some people, and I do admire these people, they know exactly what they wanted to be when they were 9 or 10, and I never did. And I'm always in search of what I want to be and what I want to do and what kind of impact. And so sometimes I think if you know and have a plan, well, good for you, but that's not me. And I just want to say that you can survive and be impactful even without having a brilliant plan by the time you're 5 or 10 or 9, or, you want to be an engineer or a doctor or whatever it is. But I want to break down what he didn't really do this, but what caprice and coincidence means, because really it sounds very individualistic, but it has to do with the context in which you're raised and your identities and the historical juncture in which you all find yourselves, as to the opportunities that are even shaped for you. So I'm going to get into that in a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to use his title for his autobiography in one of the original environmental gerontology autobiographies. And the chapter I gave you was mirrored on top of this original one, and an update representing the next generation of environmental gerontologists. And I was honored to be invited to write an autobiographical intellectual look back. But I will tell you, I fought the editors like, oh, I'm not there yet. That's, how could you ask me? I haven't done enough to warrant an autobiography. But he said, chance and choice make a good life. And that's really right, what we want for ourselves, our family members, and, we want a good life. But I would say that when you really think about your career, it's really important to be reflective. And chance, if we want to contextualize Dr. Lawton's statements, it's about opportunities that we find, that we have, and we have to understand the opportunities that are presented to us. We have to understand that they come at particular periods of history in which there's various needs. The place that we live, what our education has afforded or not, some of the privileges we have by virtue of various identities we hold, and just our general environment that supports us or not. And I just think it's very important to be a very reflective research practitioner and think about what one wants to do and recognize one's privilege and opportunities that are presented to us because of that privilege. And also that's combined with choice. So we're offered various opportunities because of our history, our background, the education that we've been afforded, the environment we live, the different identities we may have. But it also takes personal agency, right? Which means what actions we choose to act on with our opportunities, our resilience, how reflective we are, the purpose we bring, the meaning, and our personality and preferences. So maybe this is very abstract, but this is how I think about career decision-making, and that it is a very self-reflective process, and you're never over, you're never quite there. I just remember thinking, oh, I'll get my PhD and that's it. And my advisor said, guess what? I'm sorry to inform you, but when you get your PhD, your life is just at the very beginning stages. And that everything that you're struggling with now is what you will continue to struggle with for the rest of your career, which I consider a privilege to be a scientist and to have the right and the privilege to think about things. But at any rate, this is how I think about this. So I don't know if there's any reflections. I'll go on, but I don't know if you want to make any comments. I know it's at a high level. I'm not being specific yet, but any questions or thoughts? I can't see everybody, so please speak up.
Yeah, I can't see anyone either. I think you're spotlighted, right, Darren? So anyone have any questions? Feel free to add them in the chat as well. Otherwise, we can go over a discussion later after you're done. Yeah?
Yeah, okay, and just please speak up because again, I can't see everybody. And I really don't want to keep seeing myself, so I want to try to get rid of that. So, okay, I did that. So now I really can't see anybody. So you can also think of careers in terms of what Dr. Lawton said, there's a timeline, right? There's a timeline, there's a historical step 1, step 2, step 3, and that timeline mirrors jobs. It mirrors where you are in your life course. It mirrors a family timeline. And honestly, I tried on this slide to have 5 different timelines because they all intersect, but I only ended up with 2 here. But you have to think about this in a multidimensional way. So here's my job timeline. I was a major in anthropology and with a co-major in sociology and social psychology. I actually went to Temple University, and to this day, I consider that and my elementary school the best education I ever received versus my PhD. And I got to work with economists, the internationally recognized anthropologists and sociologists, and they really formed as an undergraduate level how I thought about the things and what I chose to pursue. And I also was a dance major. And very unfortunately, I had some significant back issues that knocked me out. I used to dance in a lot of a number of very well-known companies at the time in Philadelphia. Used to go on the circuit to different colleges and perform and so forth. And I actually considered, Gitlin, being a dance movement therapist, and but chose not to. But I had a serious back injury, which really prevented me from taking that seriously. But it just shows you the ups and downs of everybody's life in all different ways. But my first form of expression was through movement. And it took me many years to learn how to express myself in other ways, written and oral, verbal communications. That's not what I was comfortable with. Got my PhD at Purdue University, and I was very confused at the time. I had wonderful professors, but I didn't have any real mentorship. I didn't, except for my parents maybe, but I didn't have anybody helping me think through, what do I want to do with my life? I had no idea. I played with, as I said, dance therapy. I played with being a clinical psychologist. That was what my father was. I decided that wasn't intellectually satisfying to me. I played with all sorts of things, and I ended up going to a PhD in sociology at Purdue University because they were one of the few places that accepted me and that gave me a scholarship. And the reason why I didn't get accepted in other programs is that I never fulfilled their requisites. I was just like this, like I have family members that call me a rebel without a cause. Like, oh no, I want to be a psychologist. I'm just going to apply. And I don't care that I didn't have experimental psychology. So I have to tell you, I had a very unusual educational trajectory here. And I graduated with a PhD. I went to Purdue also because their anthropology and sociology departments were together. They were combined, which was very traditional at the time. And they also were very well known for their medical sociology. However, I had a lot of ups and downs at Purdue. I was one of the few, I was the only woman in the program, which was very challenging, both in terms of my encounters with professors and other classmates. And I was the only one that took anthropology courses, even though the departments were together. So I just had a very unusual approach. And my dissertation, which my husband refuses to have me throw out, is in the basement with, you got to remember there wasn't the internet, like with cards. And it was a historical dissertation. It was a political, it was a sociological deconstruction of the development of psychiatry and its relationship to mental illness. And it was a highly theoretical approach. And it was really, really interesting. I was asked to do a book from it, but chose not to at the time for a lot of different reasons. But it was really, really interesting. And it really contributed to the literature on professional development. And of course, I was very into mental illness and mental health and seeing people within an environment that included not only their family, but historical context and so forth. So it really fit what I was looking into. But I was but given that, and this is the confusion and who I am, it was very theory based, and I didn't want to go into academia after I got my PhD. I really didn't respect academia. I respected science. And I know that's strange now as I'm a dean, but that is the truth. And so pathways are really interesting, right? And I wanted an applied position, and I was very fortunate to get a position at the Philadelphia Geriatric Center, which is now the Polisher Research Center, which is part of the Abramson Jewish Life Center. And guess who ran that program? It was Dr. Lawton. And at that time, there were no gerontology programs. And I learned gerontology by having lunch with the founders of gerontology. And it was a really exciting time. So some of you probably don't know, like Elaine Brody, Morton Kleban and others, but they were the founders of environmental gerontology and in many aspects of gerontology. And so again, it was just a really amazing position. And I was a research coordinator on a nationally huge NIH funded, what was then called the nursing home training grants, and they had research and so forth. And the Philadelphia Geriatric Center did research on nursing homes and older adults. And then from there, I kind of outgrew that position, and some people knocked on my door and said, you work out of a person environment fit. You really should look at occupational therapy. And Jefferson has a big opening for a research coordinator. I didn't know anything about occupational therapy. The first book I read in occupational therapy was it was by a guy named Dr. Kiel, no, not Kiel Huffner. I'm just forgetting his name, but he wrote a lot about, he's at Galveston, Texas, and he wrote a lot about idiographic and nomothetic research. And I said, any profession that's really struggling with these issues and applying research to clinical practice, I want to be part of. So I spent 25 years at Thomas Jefferson University. And I was initially a research coordinator there, developed a very productive funded program of research, asked to develop a center. They supported me, and I'm forever grateful because I grew up at Jefferson. And they were at a very incipient stage in their research. I had to work with HR to develop their job descriptions for research assistants. I had to school the dean as to what a grants administrator does. I had to help chairs understand, research assistants don't just work in laboratories with bottles, but the laboratory is the community and so forth. So I really grew up there, and they let me alone. And I really flourished there, and they gave me a lot of support in a lot of different ways. And I really appreciated that. I grew a very large center. I had multiple, I was, really funded I've been funded my entire career, but I was pretty much 100% funded. You can't be 100%, but like 85, 90% funded on all different grants, and ran the center. I had anywhere from 30 to 50 employees on different grants. We were really thriving really, really well. I developed with colleagues, what's called the Jefferson Elder Care, that I'm really happy continues. The idea of it was to take the research that I had done and the interventions I had developed and to deliver them to real people using a variety of mechanisms. And the president at that time was highly supportive of the novelty. So I got a lot of institutional support to be novel and to work out these things. And I learned a lot. And sadly, I felt that you're a little, I don't know how to say this. I don't mean that. I think I'll just say it. Maybe it'll be, I say it with humility, but I became a big fish in a very small pond. And I just found it intellectually wanting, even though I had to really look for collaborators everywhere, but there wasn't, and they couldn't give me the lines that I wanted to build faculty, you know, who could help contribute. And I ended up having to support many people. And I felt that I didn't want to just be writing grants to support people. And I felt it was time for me to move on. And I started interviewing, and Hopkins learned that I was interviewing, and they contacted me and asked if I would come down for the day and just talk to them. And that's what I did. And I said, hey, wow, you guys are really stimulating. I'd love today. Could I have more days like this? And they agreed for me to start a center on behavioral intervention, which is really my true love. And that's all the work I've always done, building the science of behavioral intervention. And then from Hopkins, I became a dean. So I'm not going to get into that, but we can later. But all of these decisions about when to move and how to move, I will tell you, for me, was very much tied to where my family was at. And so as you build a family, you know, you have to think through, like, I didn't leave Jefferson for lots of reasons because it wasn't right for my family. Otherwise, I probably would have left much sooner. I started doing international travel. This was a decision right for me. And there's no judgment. Other people make other decisions, but I started doing a lot of international travel, but I only made the decision to do that when my kids could come with me. And my husband has a very flexible, he owns his own publishing firm, so, you know, he could come, but that was right for me. And other people make other decisions. So I just wanted to say that the decisions, taking on which projects, traveling, all of that is made with lots of different contexts. And so those are the two things I just wanted to share here. Any questions or thoughts? There's a lot to say about when you move on and when you don't move on, but.
I just wanted to say we really appreciate you sharing your journey candidly, including choices, because, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, in hindsight, everything is very clear, but as you're moving forward, it's really, you're just doing the best decision for yourself at that time. And I appreciate you really highlighting that, because that decision is different for everyone. The
It
context.
is, and I'll show you a slide where I have a jumble of different considerations, and what those considerations are will differ. But the more explicit you understand what your decision making is composed of, the more purposeful your decision making can be. I guess that's my point. There's a lot of reasons why I do what I do, and I'm not going to get into that. I explain that in the chapter, so to speak. But when you look at your own lives and where do research questions come from, they typically come from a challenge you personally have had or continue to have. That's really where most research questions have come from. Or you're in clinical practice and you see certain patterns or, you know, issues that keep coming up, and you're really troubled by them. And so again, from a research point of view, reflecting on what is it that you know, is important to you. And I've always been looking for lots of different reasons, personal reasons. You know, how do you make daily life better, particularly for people with serious chronic illness, whatever that may be. And there's always a way to make life better. And what is that? And so I'm very action oriented. And I worked with a social psychologist who did a tremendous amount of work in Philadelphia. I was his research assistant for many years on gangs in North Philadelphia, and really looking at that interplay between opportunity and agency, and how people adapt to and make life better, even when conditions are such that, you know, they're pretty rough. And so I've used the biopsychosocial kind of ecological framework to understand individuals in their living environments. And I was very much oriented to how do individuals and families adapt to things. And older adults only came in once I had my position with M. Powell Lawton, and I was very turned on by aging, and it kind of represented how people's decisions in early in life impact later life, but yet you can change at whatever age you are. And as people age with comorbidities, how do they adapt to that and make life meaningful? And that's, so I developed a whole range of interventions. I have over like 20 different interventions. I'm just going to name some of them. The Advancing Better Living for Elders, which is ABLE, was a really important study that we did at Jefferson. And that's when Hopkins reached out to me and said, could we collaborate on this? And we developed another version of that called Capable, which now resides, both ABLE resides at Jefferson and Capable resides at Hopkins. And it's now being used in, I think, over 30 some sites. And there's an attempt to write it into law. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then I did a really important study, Beat the Blues, with the Senior Center, and again, really tackling depression in older African Americans, because evidence-based depression trials really have failed African American communities. And there's a really interesting story about Beat the Blues. It was incredibly effective, and yet I can't move it out of the efficacy stage. I'm giving a lecture in November at the gerontological meetings, like stuck in phase 3 efficacy. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But this was a really amazing intervention, a great collaboration with a community organization. We worked together for 10 years. Together, we collaborated on, I think it was $10 to $15 million worth of grants. It just was a fantastic collaboration. I can't see what this is. Let's see what it is. So Harvest Health is another one that I did with Beat the Blues, where we took chronic disease self-management, Kate Lorig's program out in Stanford, and we modified it for African American community, found great benefits. Let's see what else I have here. Nothing else is coming there. There's a whole junction. I'll have a whole slate of depression interventions, dementia interventions. I got into dementia for a number of reasons, and to be really academic, and it really represents one of the most dramatic kinds of conditions one can have, and yet you really see adaptation and resilience, and a lot going on in the dementia world, of course. And then, by the way, guess what? There was funding for the first project, for the NIA project, for the ABLE project. There was funding for Beat the Blues. And now guess where all the funding is? It's in dementia. So do I just chase funding? No, but you have to align your interests with funding. So if I can answer certain questions within the realm of dementia, that's where I'm going to go to be able to answer those questions. But that doesn't mean I'm really interested in a lot of other things in dementia, but most people don't understand that because they only see dementia. Just a lot of other dementia programs, tailored activity program I brought from Hopkins to Drexel. We now have an online program, and we're about to launch it. It's used, as Dr. Kaimal indicated, in a number of countries. I'm very wed to its dissemination and want to spend more time with that, and also Project Hope. And then, as Nicole indicated, she's the project coordinator for We Care Advisor. We think it has commercial opportunity, but we're really testing it in a phase 3 efficacy trial, and we're pretty excited about. These are just some. I've done about 20 interventions, so I really love interventions. That's what gets me excited. I can talk about interventions forever. When you do behavioral intervention science, you have to know about measurement. You have to know about stakeholders. You have to know about value propositions. You have to know about how do you engage the community. It's really a very dynamic. Let's put it this way, you're never bored when you're doing intervention research, and there's always problems, but always kinds of problems that you sort of have to endorse. So those are that. So another way to think about my trajectory in terms of career is that typically you develop an intervention, it's a period of discovery. You look at, you go in terms of an explanatory framework, in order to understand relationships, and then you move into a predictive. And I've always been at the predictive level, testing. I'm a user of everybody's discovery and explanatory research. You give me a great epidemiological study, I'm going to love it. I'm going to look at it in terms of targets. I'm going to use it to develop a predictive or an intervention study. That's how I'm a user. I use the theories other people develop to help frame different questions and to create new knowledge. But this is kind of the traditional course in which you develop, a research trajectory from discovery, explanatory approaches, predictive. But in reality, it's not like that. Again, it's messy. So you're at a predictive stage, you're doing an intervention. Oh, and guess what? There isn't a measurement of engagement. There's no good measurement of engagement. So what do you have to do? Well, I know my intervention impacts engagement, and we know, and Dr. Kaimal, your research is so relevant here, we know engagement is so, and Carolina, engagement is the heart of the matter, right? It's really important. How do we measure it? You have to go back to discovery and explanatory type studies. So I have found myself all over the map, but I'm primarily an interventionist, and that's how I define myself as a scientist. So I'm just trying to give you different approaches to how I think about it. I think this is too detailed. I'm not going to go over the slide. We can later, but I guess I would just want to say, when you're this is probably too detailed, but when you're into behavioral intervention research and you develop a program and you've tested it and it's effective, the question in the field is ethically, what should you do? Is that enough? So you've identified a problem, you have a variety of studies that you've tested its feasibility, its effectiveness, its efficacy. This is a pipeline that follows my own career development. So I've been primarily right here, problem identification and inquiry. And then these interventions are effective and they really make a difference in people's lives. And then it's like, well, what do I do next? Well, I have to get it into the real world. And so in the last 10 years, that's what I've been really focusing on. How do I get it into the real world? And then do researchers have to do it all? Should I even be concerned about this? Can I hand this off to somebody else and have them do it? So these are all just, there's ethics here. Like I just spent NIH dollars, 10 years of multi-million dollars. Am I ethically bound to get this out into healthcare systems? So these are just some of the questions you grapple with, but this follows a timeline of my life. And so, in a mature stage, if you will, and I laugh when I say that, but in a mature stage, I think, I still have a number of interventions in my head and I'm working with others to develop. So I'm still here. But then I think, do I have 20 to 30 years left in me to get it out? And therefore, ethically, should I even begin here? Or who do I partner with who can take it? Because I'm not going to be around for 30 years doing this stuff. So these are just things you think about at different points in your career. You don't have to worry about that now, but that's what I think about. Like, ethically, do I even begin a new intervention, right? I mean, the answer is yes, because there's ways to address that, but at any rate. I'm just trying to get out of here. Here is an idea that this is how I think about things now in my world. And this is, I'm sure you've all heard of that 17-year, trajectory, which is, it's more than 17 years. And I can map any one of my interventions along a 25-year pathway. So here, this is COPE, which I won't get into the details, but it's a nurse occupational therapy combination, care management, education, very person, family-centered approach. And here was the original grant submission, awarded, JAMA publication, replicate. No one was interested in it. I mean, I couldn't believe it. One of the very first dementia non-pharmacologic approaches published in JAMA in 2010, and no one wanted to do it. I was shocked. But it takes, I find, 5 years from publication before could you send me the article, or would you be willing to work with us and revise it for this population? Have you found that to be the case, Dr. Kamal?
Absolutely. It's almost exponential, I feel like, there's an initial impact, and maybe things are a little different now with more publicity and social media and sort of dissemination of research. But, initially it's like bumpy, and then and sometimes the things you didn't expect kind of take off. And other things I still wonder, like that was really nice. How come none of you got into?
I know. It's very
Yeah.
haphazard. I mean, and yeah, I agree. As soon as something comes out, there's a rush, and you're on ResearchGate, LinkedIn, whatever it is. And can I have the article? Can I? Yes, yes, yes. And then radio silence. And then 2016, a very close colleague of mine wanted to replicate COPE, Dr. Fortinsky, in Medicaid waiver programs in Connecticut. Main publication just came out. Other publications we're working on. It's cost effective. That's under review right now. The Medicaid waiver in Connecticut is considering adapting it. Really exciting. Other ongoing publications, there's replication by the administration, community living. Different places are trying to adapt it. It's been disseminated. I have a training group in Australia, and I can't believe them. They just sent me the list of 168 nurses and OTs that they just finished training. That's after like hundreds of others they've trained. And so that's really amazing. And now we have funding. I don't think anyone on the phone is involved with this, the COPE program in PACE, Trinity Healthcare setting. And we're developing an online training program at Drexel, and it's really exciting. We're using animation because COVID didn't allow us to use patient actors. And I hear. So now it's in policy. So here's the idea, and by the way, behind here are years of developing different strategies and protocols. And this is kind of a trajectory, and this is just one trajectory of one type of research. But that's me. This is me, right? This is what I do, intervention research. And so it's a big commitment, and there's a lot of ups and downs in turns, but it just gives you an idea of what it takes even to get evidence out there. And then the question is, what do your teams look like at each of these stages? And they will look different, and you have to think through that carefully. But just to conclude here, I just wanted to say that I got to move these things. They're all over the place. These are here's some bubbles that really go into career decision-making. And you could map this out for yourself, and each bubble could be smaller or larger, depending. And I have to say, of course, I don't know any of you in terms of your family, but in terms of family life, sometimes it's going to be small, and sometimes it's going to be the biggest consideration, right? And obviously, personal interests and what you want to accomplish have to drive everything. But recognize too that your personal interests are intertwined with opportunities and privileges and chance and choice. And then you have agency, because even whatever opportunity you have, if you don't have the agency to go for it and the passion, it just won't happen. And then, of course, where you are in terms of different identities and where you are in your life course. You heard me say, in this time in my life course, I have to think differently about creating an intervention. Like, how far am I going to be able to take that? How much time is it going to take? What does the investment want to be? So these are just decisions that you make at at another stage, family was like the biggest bubble in the world to me, and so forth. And that will be different. And I just think you need to recognize that. And when people come to me and cry, this is what this is how I try to focus. What are you interested in? What is your passion? What kind of impact do you want to make? And what are the considerations? And they're all valid. And I don't think in many ways that we allow the validation that family, caregiving, and other kinds of factors in our environment will definitely shape our career decisions to move or not to move, to take on a new position, to not take on a new position. I have to summarize. Here are just some of my lessons. Career paths are not linear. although they appear at the end of one's life, different times of the life course, you can map it out linearly because you can map it out historically. And that's what your CV does. In 2005, you got your dissertation. In 2008, you went here, et cetera, et cetera. But in each of, as you think through your career, there's many decisions that need to be considered, and just to know that that's valid. Just because somebody says you have to get your first R01 by a certain date or a postdoc by a certain date, that's maybe very helpful, but at the same time, there's other considerations. Mentorship is really key. I have to say, I grew up without mentorship until very late in my career. And even like today, I have, very close colleagues who I always say, we're meeting today because you have to be my mentor, And it's really, really, really critical to have formal and possibly informal mentors. And the content of that changes between content experts, other individuals who you aspire to. I find that very inspiring to meet with somebody who inspires me and to think through, what it takes. If you're going to be a funded researcher, it's really critical to think through what your passion is, but you have to be very flexible and nimble so you can take advantage of funding opportunities and also create a diverse funding portfolio. And you have to learn how to be incredibly efficient. And that is like, I'll never do a poster or a presentation that doesn't contribute in some way or directly lead to a publication. A lecture that I'll just say a lecture that I give, this is an exception because I already wrote the article, but I used to give these lectures that formed that article. So how I think about things, I use lectures to help me put things together that then become something. So you really want to be efficient. And I believe in team science, but that isn't the only science, and I recognize that. And the other thing I would say is that there are specific challenges in a research career. And happy to talk about any of them. They're on the slide. You can have these slides. But keeping research teams going is always a challenge. Building a research team is a challenge. There's a lot of different skills for doing research. It's every time I think we're done with research requirements and oversight, there's new restrictions. And NIH, for example, is now putting out new restrictions in recruitment and information you report on recruitment. At any rate, these are just all different considerations. And recognize that when you say yes to a career path, or something like, yes, I want to write this book, or yes, I want to do this chapter, that means you're saying no to something else. So just think about that. What does yes mean? Yes means that other things you can't do. So make sure you, as best as you can, of course, we say yes to everything, but as best as you can, know that your yes is also a no to other things. And I just think that's important, a lesson that I learned. And then finally, I really recommend that people develop like a personal mission statement. And in research, that you have, what's the impact you want to have? You want to change, what do you want to change? What do you want to happen? And then map research ideas to that mission statement. And as funding emerges, you have an opportunity to say, this is too far out from what I'm thinking about or what my mission is, or this could be in line with my mission if I pose it that way. But I find this kind of graphic very centering because you will be asked to do lots of different things. And then what do you do and what don't you do? And having some kind of mission, whether it be of a specific research question with a specific clinical population, or wanting to change healthcare in very specific ways. I just find this to be a very useful tool. And with that, I'm going to stop.
Wonderful. Oh gosh, this is amazing. I have so many questions. I will hold off. I will hold off. And I would love if our attendees, students, postdocs, any of you want, this is your time. The precious few minutes you'll have with our dean. So go ahead. Um, if you have any comments, questions, go for it.
Can I pose a question? This is Arun.
Mhm.
Of course.
He didn't get in this. Looking at the trajectory, it seems like a super upward trajectory. I wanted to ask you if there have been any moments of um, uh, any kind of jump off points or decision making points, and what really helped you like push through it or make some drastic changes. Like, was it the science or was it your conviction? What exactly helped you through making the decisions?
I guess I'd answer that question in terms of making a decision to change a position. And it's hard when you've been at an institution for a very long time to basically break up a team, to leave valued colleagues. So if I understood your question, I think I would have to say that it is conviction. It's what I thought I needed in order to pursue great science. Just to give an example of switching from the geriatric center to Jefferson, from Jefferson to Hopkins. That was a serious consideration. And then where my family was, whether I could commute to a different city, whether, all those then come into play as well. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
Or
I was trying to see if you had a path mapped out and this is what helped you get to that next point, and that these are the means to get to that point.
for me, it does.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was just trying to see what was it that you were looking forward to. And maybe that question is too vague. I'm just
No,
trying to
I mean, I
jump
think,
off points.
yeah, I mean, I think that I guess, again, I would just fall back to when you're thinking of changing a position, what are all the factors that go into it? And are you able to do that? And I think that I think some people do. So you're going to hear from lots of different people, and you can contrast what I consider a little haphazard, or for example, there's an opportunity. Hopkins knocking on my door, it came at the right time. If it was 5 years earlier, I couldn't have taken it because of family and other caregiving responsibilities. So it's all alignment of all of that. So I think, being open to opportunities, but evaluating them within a larger whole of one's life is something that I do. But other people have very planned career. And there's by the way, there's a very clear pathway to be a dean. So, and I'm not knocking it, that's terrific. So other people, and you'll hear from other people, have very clear pathways. My pathway was not clear, and a little, you may experience it, you see nice lines here, it's logical, but I didn't experience it as logical. I didn't experience it as, I'm always struggling. What's my next step? I'm always, where's the impact? Why do I want to have impact here? Being the chair of the advisory council for Alzheimer's, it took a lot of time and effort, but I felt that I never had a strong role in policy, and here was an opportunity that I had some skills that I could bring, but then I would learn a lot about how policy decisions are made. So I felt it was worth, a lot of time and energy. But there isn't, but I don't have a well-defined, I have friends still, they'll tell me these 10 years I'm doing this, in 5 years, and then 15 years later, I'm going to retire. And then, I'm there, wow, that's really pretty good, but that isn't how I experience my life or journey. And so I just wanted to offer you guys an alternative to being incredibly planful, although being incredibly planful may be less anxiety producing. I really don't know, but for me it isn't. But
It's fantastic. And I think what you're saying is that at each point you really optimized opportunities and sort of challenged yourself too to stretch and grow and um, not stay comfortable
yes,
with your
yes,
scholarship, with your learning, and you always sort of,
yes,
um, however that might be, sometimes you're challenged by family needs, sometimes you're challenged by
yes.
professional needs, but you sort of took that to move, to the next level and stretched yourself in every way. Um,
Yes. And so that I do have in one of those bubbles, I think or somewhere personality.
mhm,
And you have to know yourself. So although I was at Jefferson for 25 years, close to 25 years, I really thrive on change.
mhm.
Change. I feel better with change. So other people don't, and that's fine. But I really like change, and I don't find it uncomfortable. And so I'm always looking for a change. So even at Jefferson, even though I'm not going to say I was stuck there, but I was in many ways because of other obligations that kept me there. But then I looked for other opportunities to satisfy my personality of change and difference. So I think you have to really know yourself. And again, there's many ways to many. There isn't a right way here. I want to emphasize that. Um, you know, if people like stability and not change, that doesn't mean you can't be impactful or whatever. I'm just saying that that's not who I am. So I like change, and I like to be pressed, and I like to be in situations where I'm really going to have to grow. And if I don't feel like I'm growing, I will change. I will change the situation. And that's what keeps me going. That's what interests me, learning. And I feel that I think all of us are like in a really privileged um, position to have to read an article and understand it. There's and and grow from it. And so I thrive on that, and that makes me happy.
Great. We have another question here. Any recommendations? This is from Bani Malhotra, doctoral student. Any recommendations around navigating and recognizing politics in academia?
Yeah, uh, it, it's tough. I don't think people understand how tough politically academic environments are. Um, I think that's true in a lot of in all universities, and they're really tough to navigate. So this is where mentorship is absolutely critical. Now Dr. Kaimal is a co-investigator on a grant that we have a really good score. We're waiting to hear if we're going to get funded from the NIH, which would allow us to develop a mentorship and what's called a sponsorship infrastructure. So not just mentorship, like what's my research question and how do you think I should answer it, and what's the team look like, but sponsorship in terms of really being able to talk to and have a confidant to think about who one is in a complex organizational environment. And higher education is a complex organizational environment. I have to say that, we all see things that could be changed and different, but it's not easy in all health systems, higher ed. It's not easy to change organizations and to change organizational culture. So I guess there isn't any clear cut, stepped approach I can say, except mentorship is key. Having an honest relationship with a mentor and having somebody who could serve as a sponsor so that you can I work very closely with a couple. I do mentor a couple people still from Hopkins and also at Drexel and others. And uh, I think, just untangling what's happening. Is it my gender? Is it my race? Is it my ethnicity? Is it my rank? Is it that I'm first generation? Oh, guess what? It's all of those things. Or it's none of those things. Or it's everybody is feeling this way, but because of who you are in terms of being first generation, or assistant professor, this is how you're experiencing it. So disentangling and I don't know if you can disentangle, but understanding this web is really, really important. Does that help you or answer the question? I'm not sure, but it's knowing that this is a challenge for everybody and can be more challenging for, I believe, young women and young women of color. I think it's a very tough environment. And I can be very honest with you. My son is an assistant professor at Brown, and I have these conversations with him all the time because he's looking at he's stuck in politics too. So everybody has different pressures based on different identities. And hey, Bob, do you have any insight into that or thoughts about that? It's tough. It's a tough.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think your comment you've made throughout and what you just made is, I think, the importance of mentoring. I think in our college through the years, some very talented people, one, I think you have to have the passion for research, but oftentimes there are openings because of the clinical part, and people have taken positions at universities. Often they may not be research focused, but they may even be, but there is not a mentoring. And I think sometimes I tell people you can't take that personally, but I think that's where I feel in my own looking at students is so important, that when you take a new position, that there is an environment, and that when you're interviewing, you have a sense that people really, are able to support that. Because I think sometimes people they take it personally, and it gets really hard in a new position, and it's not them, it's just they don't have an environment. And my personal feeling is it's really hard, if not impossible, to become an R01 funded researcher if some way along the line you haven't had some mentoring in that particular area where you're looking for funding. So I just think that's probably the most important thing when you're looking for a new faculty position.
Totally agree. And I think that's the question to ask, like, what's the mentorship plan? And that's something that, we're really struggling with in the college, the university, but also the college, and some departments do it better than others. But as a college, we really need a stronger infrastructure. I'm hoping this grant will help do that, a stronger infrastructure. I mean, we're all, there's a lot of reasons why that has happened, which we don't have to get into, but I mean, finances and the moving from a more teaching environment to an R1 environment. There's a lot of reasons historically, but I agree. Like all of you on job markets, I mean, what's the mentorship plan? What is the plan for setting up mentorship for my success? That is, to me, a very fair question, and it could also be written in a letter, of an appointment letter as to what your expectation, so that you know what to expect. I think that's really important. Yeah,
I'm just mindful of the time. I know you are really busy. I know we have plenty of more questions. So
I'm okay for another 5 or 10 minutes if you want, if there's more. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone else has any questions, we have a few more minutes. I did want to add here, I think in situations like this, and most situations, knowledge is power, right? So to sort of be proactive, try to understand the systems that you're in as much as possible. And every system has its own sort of unwritten rules and norms, which might not be ideal, but to know those is to be able to better navigate. And similarly, sort of to know your own strengths and weaknesses will help you find mentors. So I always think about, okay, what am I not really good at? And that's where I need mentorship.
Mm,
What are my weaknesses? And this is where I want to learn from someone who doesn't have
mm,
weaknesses. So, your point about really being aware of your own set of bubbles, uh, it will really help, and that'll be your trajectory.
yeah.
So, for example, my funding trajectory was not NIH at all. It's been DoD and other funding agencies, and the RO1 trajectory did not really fit with how I function and the kind of research I do. Um, and that's been my choice. That's been my journey. Doesn't mean that'll be my journey going forward, but it was a specific set of life choices I made, and I appreciate you saying that. That um, for everyone the trajectory might be different, and I and life has a way of kind of humbling everyone. So even those people who kind of fully had their life mapped out, like stuff always happens. And who I know I'm whose life has ever turned out to be exactly as they imagine? It never does. So some of it is really sort of figuring out and optimizing what you want with what circumstances you're in.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that totally. And I agree with the funding pathway. And I do think there's definitely a bias towards the R1 NIH, and there's a lot of criteria in certain universities. There's a criteria for that you don't get promoted unless you have 1, 2, whatever it is, grants. But I really think that's short-sighted in terms of science, even. I mean, I don't agree with that. Again, there's questions. There's, by the way, policy research questions that NIH will not look at. And they're very critical, and that's science and research. And so I think that you should feel confident and comfortable in saying, look, there's other pathways, to address the research questions that I want to address. And that's what works, the best match between what you want to do, your research question, and then, a funding mechanism.
Do you want to quickly tell us something about your leadership choices, about becoming a dean, and what you see as a connection to your scholarship?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to say the choice of the dean simply. I think that, again, you have to look at it from a life course perspective, where I am in terms of my life course and what do I want to accomplish. And I do think at any juncture, it's about impact. And I, at the time, so I've been here 4 years. At the time, I felt that I'm a builder, and that's what I like to do. And I built a Center for Innovative Care and Aging, and I'm ready to move on, and what opportunities are there to have impact? And it kind of fits into that slide where it's like problem identification, efficacy, translation, like sustainability. How do I get evidence, and how do I change healthcare? Okay, I mean, how do you change the preparation of a workforce to be person and family centered? How do you introduce life course content and aging content when everyone thinks that it's all about PEDS? PEDS is, of course, critical. I'm not saying that, but it's really about the life course, and what happens in PEDS, really affects what happens in different ages, et cetera. So from that perspective of impact, I thought it could be really impactful to see how to shape a diverse college of, I'll just say, of health sciences that impacts many different professions and in many different ways, and to help a college really elevate its contributions to workforce preparation and meet the new demands, which are the skill demands are really changing in all of health professions in different ways. And then I also came as a research dean, and there are research deans, not many, but there are. And so I do maintain a program of research. And that's not necessarily an approach to deanship that everybody believes in or endorses, but that's one that was agreed to before I came. And so I do continue with a program of research. And I think that's important for modeling. I think it's important. It's taught me what systems we have, what systems we don't have. You know, so I'll say that. The other thing is that there are many deans, many is too strong. There are deans who come strictly from the research world. Other deans move up a kind of more traditional trajectory, being a chair, being a assistant dean, being associate dean, then being a dean, and having a degree in higher education or organization, you know. But I will say that running different research programs, you develop the skills that are very relevant to being a dean. Managing multiple budgets. I have a shared leadership, collaborative leadership approach, bringing people together in teams, organizational thinking. So those kinds of things are not a big leap. I can say what some of the things were a big leap for me, but I mean, that's how I would answer the question to you. Does that help? Does that answer it in part?
Yeah. And I see what you're talking about, impact and all the different ways you've thought about making the world, you know, a better place in each of your choices, from a task in a project to sort of college-wide, healthcare-wide impact. So
yeah, it's really interesting because I am on a number of advisory committees, and they're all talking about how are we going to train nurses and how are we going to train health providers, and I'm thinking, well, why aren't we talking about curriculum? Like, why aren't we I'm not saying it's too late, but you're talking about practitioners in the field, and why aren't we talking about the systems that reinforce and look at nurses in terms of, like, I think 60 to 70% of all education of nurses nationally, I think it's over 70%, is for acute care. That's not the major problem in our country. It's in chronic disease care and prevention. And then you have to go and look at it from an interprofessional perspective. And I think the college we're nowhere near this, but we can get there. We could be really dynamic in paving the way that way, in being interprofessional and looking at prevention and chronic disease management. But really right now, nursing throughout the country, about 60, 70% of all clinical placements are in hospitals. Most care is occurring in primary care and community-based settings. And with an aging society, that's where it's going to happen. It's not the hospital. First, there's not going to be hospitals as we know it. Care is moving into the home and to communities, into urgent care. I mean, these are movements that will take shape and are going to escalate over time. And when I say the future, I mean within 5 years or so, you know, it's gonna have to look different, I think.
Yeah.
So I think it's impact, you know, so when you think about having that kind of impact is compelling, I think. Not to sit, well, yeah, I'll just leave it like that. It's hard, but I think it's
different levels of impact. And I'd really, really appreciate, I think we all appreciate how candidly you shared your choices and all the different roles and work that you've done. So thank you so much. If there's no other questions, we will wrap up today. So very grateful for your insights. I wrote down a bunch of things. I'm going to be thinking about them and what that means for our work here in the college as faculty, as mentors, as well as for our students. In many ways, I think we're all sort of colleagues, but we also learn from each other all the time. So
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share. And good luck to everybody. And I'll be interested in hearing your career paths.